As a consumer, does demand for ethical products have power on the decisions made in supply chains? Presented by Michael Onyach, Hussam Al-maawy, and Salah Mohamed.
Consumer Power and Ethical Supply Chain Networks, presented by Salah Mohamed. How does consumer power create ethical supply chains? First of all, we're going to answer what are ethics? Ethics are set moral guidelines which individuals, organizations, and people follow and are meant to adhere to. When we look at in relation to supply chain, an ethical supply chain would be influenced by consumer due to their power, government due to their regulations, and industry due to the set guidelines within the industry. Second of all, we'll be looking at what is an ethical product. An ethical product is a product that has set moral guidelines in its production, like ensuring the production function or activities is not damaging consumers or society. That its sources, its raw materials, has is ethical with its labor by fair trade and has ethical distribution. Third of all, we'll be looking at who is an ethical consumer. An ethical consumer refers to an individual or an organization that is looking for a product that meets the exact moral guidelines in terms of its sourcing. It needs to be ethically sourced by ensuring the product is being sourced. The product being sourced is created in a safe facility for workers who are treated well and paid fair wages to work legal hours. Consumer power and ethical supply chain networks. The concerns about ethical supply chain management arises from the impact production activities have on the development and growth of the society. The ethical problems that people usually have, one of them is human and animal rights. Consumers' powers affect supply chain networks of unethical products that violate human and animal rights due to various negative ethical behaviors such as boycotts that are mostly organized by campaign groups. Another ethical problem usually is fair trade. Consumers tend to be attracted to goods that are fairly traded under ethical values that adhere to both social and environmental standards. The third ethical problem is environmental. Environmental pollution as a result of production activities hinders reuse of resources after production activities are completed. Consumer power can ensure sustainable extraction of raw materials by boycotting products that do not meet set ethical standards, forcing sellers to ensure their supply chain networks are ethical in production. An example for this is several firms such as Chevron, Volkswagen, BP, and others have experienced a decrease in customer demand due to bad reputation caused by unethical practices such as pollution. Particularly, the emission control software regulates conducted by the Volkswagen company that led to the violation of clean air rules has negatively affected the firm's supply chain and also value chain. So how does consumer power create ethical supply chains? First of all, outsourcing of production to developing countries has helped companies reduce costs at the expenses of factory employees as they work in conditions do not meet the International Labour Organization health and safety standards. Consumer powers can influence the demand of products that meet established regulation and production, such as those outlined by the International Labour Organization, which can ensure ethical supply chain networks, as sellers will want to make this their unique selling point. Second of all, through the use of social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, consumers have been allowed to communicate a lot more and has strengthened them with an opportunity to reach other consumers on a global platform, forcing suppliers to meet consumer demands for ethical products in the market to avoid losing out on revenue.
In this section, I'll be looking into how consumer power can create an ethical supply chain in relation to Cox Power Matrix and Kraljic Matrix, presented by Michael Onyach. Cox Power Matrix shows buyer power at different stages in the market relative to suppliers. At buyer dominant stage, the consumer is able to influence the suppliers as they have a higher percentage share of the market. Demanding for ethical products therefore results to creation of ethical supply chain networks. Buyer switching costs are low, therefore changing suppliers who do not meet ethical standards forces suppliers to change to ethical supply chain networks to avoid losing revenue. In this type of market, consumer power influences what product is brought into the market, ensuring employees receive fair wages and raw materials are sourced sustainably. In a supplier-dominated market, Cox Power Matrix suggests that the consumer has a lower percentage share of the market compared to suppliers. At this stage, the supplier is not dependent on the consumer for revenue, and the switching costs are too high for consumers to look for alternatives. Unable to sway sellers to change from the current supply chain networks for more ethical supply chain networks, the market will be unable to reflect the consumer power, and in turn, this shows how buyer position is crucial in influencing the creation of ethical supply chain networks. Looking at Kraljic matrix support the argument set by Cox for a buyer-dominated market that leverage the cost of switching suppliers is low for consumers, therefore proving that consumer power can influence supply chain network. Suppliers will adhere to ethical standards established by consumers in order to gain consumer loyalty and increase profitability. However, at bottleneck stage, the seller experiences low profit and high supply risk, therefore shifting to an ethical supply chain network may be disadvantageous to them, proving the argument against consumer power being able to influence supply chain network. Fiji Water Company is a water bottling company which obtains water from natural aquifers found in the Fiji Islands. The company experienced great government support as it contributes greatly to the economy of the country. However, local population was unable to access clean drinking water despite the company producing the world's most popular water brand, Fiji Water. Public outcry against the company led to changes being made by the company to contribute more than financially to the host country. Clean water projects established countrywide where the company was operating by providing water filters to enable the local population to access clean drinking water shows how consumer power, in form of protests and boycotts, can influence supply chain networks. The company joined the Carbon Disclosure Project in order to show their sustainability growth as an organization from extraction of water to supplying the market. Counterargument to consumer power influencing the supply chain would be, in an independent market where suppliers have little dependence on buyers for revenue, demand for ethical products has little or no effect as the suppliers can look for affordable alternatives which will enable them to make most profits.
In this section, I'm going to talk about how consumer power can create an ethical supply chain in relation to the triple bottom line concept presented by Hussam Al-maawy. The concept, the triple bottom line, was first conceived by John Elkington in the year 1994. The concept itself is extensively described in his book Cannibals with Forks. The concept of the triple bottom line states that a company's responsibility lies with the stakeholders rather than the shareholders. In this case, the stakeholders refer to anyone who is influenced directly or indirectly by the firm. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about what is the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line dimensions are also commonly called the 3Ps. The 3Ps consist of the people, the planet, and the profit. In the previous slide, I mentioned the company responsibility lies with the stakeholders rather than the shareholders. In this slide, I'm going to explain why a company should not focus only at the profit but should look into the other 2Ps, such as the planet and the people. For example, consider you're running a factory. Now, as you know, it's clear that the factory will produce waste. Nearby the factory, there's a lake. Wouldn't it be easier for the factory to emit the waste into the lake? However, the 3Ps must consider the people as well as the planet. The effects of dumping the waste would be harmful to the people as well as the planet. Globally, contaminated water is a serious problem that can cause severe pain, disability, and even death. People become infected with the diseases when they swallow or have contact with water that has been contaminated. Water pollution can have dire consequences for plants and animals and even ecosystems as a whole. At the profit side, businesses that conduct unethical practices such as contributing to degradation of the environment will not be rewarded through the consumer loyalty, translating into lower profit margins. Consumers are willing to pay a premium price for products, knowing that a percentage of the price goes to giving farmers a fair wage or contributes to sustainable production practices. To relate to the question, to answer the question, it was important for us to get to know what the triple bottom line is. But to answer the question, how it affects the people, firms that produces products based on people's ethical values and fair business practices such as fair trade tend to attract more consumers. Thus, the demand for the product increases, as well as the supply and value chain, and vice versa is the case. To the planet. A farm that observes environmental awareness and protects the natural settings of the planet through avoiding pollution and environmental degradation practices attract ethical consumers. Thus, the supply chain can be affected by non-adherence to environmental conservation measures. To the profit. Consumers' demand for product produced by an enterprise that shares its financial benefits, such as profits through corporate social responsibilities, increases compared to one that shares none. Therefore, through CSR, consumers have power in determining the demand for ethical products, hence affecting the supply chain. So, I've explained how the triple bottom line answers the question through this slide. In summary, in today's world, ethical issues are becoming a global concern as businesses for a long time were left to operate without any form of regulation or repercussion for unethical practices. However, with consumer power influencing sellers in the market to opt for ethical supply chain networks, the market has seen a dramatic shift with more and more organizations promoting fair trade practices as well as publishing corporate social responsibility report. It can be established that the demand for ethical products by consumers has the power to influence and change supply chain networks to be more sustainable and ethical from production to delivery. Thank you.